Welcome to the Divorce School session on how to help children cope with divorce. My name is Cathy Meyer. I'm a Master Certified Divorce Coach and Managing Editor of DivorcedMoms.com. Joining me on this podcast is Terry Gaspard. Terry is a licensed therapist, college instructor, and owner of MovingPastDivorce.com. She specializes in divorce and women's issues. Terry is also the author of Daughters of Divorce and is a contributor to the Huffington Post Divorce Vertical, DivorcedMoms.com, and DivorceMagazine.com. Welcome, Terry. I'm excited about today's subject matter.
Hi, Cathy. Great to be here talking to you.
Good to hear your voice again, and let's get this discussion started. I've got some questions, so here we go with the first one. Can you tell our listeners why you choose to specialize in divorce and the kinds of problems parents usually contact you about?
Yes, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and so in my practice, I come up against a lot of individuals who have dealt with divorce, and since 40% of adults between the ages of 18 and 40 were raised in divorced homes, I also work with a lot of both children of divorce and adult children of divorce. And I'm an adult child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and I also ended up getting a divorce myself in the mid-90s. So I am very interested in all topics related to divorce, specifically as they affect children, young adults, co-parenting, families, women's issues. That's a big interest of mine. And my book is really focused on how the legacy of divorce doesn't have to be passed down in families. You can have a much more optimistic view of love and commitment and carve out your own pathway in life.
Yes. That 40% statistic, that's alarming. It's startling. I did not know that.
It always shocks me, even though I've read it for years and it's throughout my book. But it really kind of normalizes the divorce experience. And divorce really hit its peak in 1969 and 1970 with the no-fault divorce legislation. And it skyrocketed in the 70s and early 80s. And then for a while it was going down a bit, and it was dipping. And now it's back up. It's truly about half of all marriages end in divorce. So the skills that we're going to be talking about are so relevant for many families. No one really prepares you for having a conversation with your child about divorce. And even if you're a great parent and you feel like, things have been going fairly well, there are so many challenges that can come your way. And I really greatly enjoy the opportunity to talk to parents about coping skills that they can develop for themselves and for their children.
Yes. Well, let me ask you, are there common problems that parents face when trying to help their child cope with divorce?
Yes, a lot of parents feel guilty and they wish that they could have done something differently, and unfortunately they may not know what to say to their child about the divorce. So sometimes they either don't give enough information or they give too much information. So they really want to talk to me and get information about how to develop, a narrative that they can talk to their child about, depending on the age of the child, of course. And many parents, both men and women, have challenges with co-parenting, because even though most of us know that co-parenting is, for the most part, in the best interest of children, it's very hard to navigate a co-parenting relationship with someone that you're not particularly friendly with, perhaps, or if the divorce, was acrimonious. Nobody really gives you guidelines for that. And then in terms of custody issues, I'm not a lawyer, but I can help parents with themes such as, what if your child tells you they want to go live with the other parent full-time and they are only going to be spending 1 or 2 days a week with you? How do you cope with that? And another common challenge is long-distance parenting, because mostly dads, but even some women, have to move because of their career. And they feel guilty, they feel sad about that. It's not usually their choice. And they wonder, I get a lot of comments on my website, how is that going to affect my child? And what can I do to prevent any emotional damage as a result of not having regular weekly contact with them? And then I get a lot of moms really curious about, and dads too, also about dating. Is it okay to date after my divorce? And how soon should I introduce my new love interest to my child? And that is a really important topic, because if you introduce your partner too soon, it can backfire, and what was maybe a rebound relationship for you, which could be fun and enjoyable, may hurt your child if they had high expectations, that you were going to, be a new family again, or maybe they got attached to the person, or maybe they're feeling rivalry, they're feeling jealousy, and they're just resentful about you having a partner too soon after the divorce. So those are some very common issues and concerns that parents talk to me about.
And I find that interesting, because the problems aren't with the children themselves. The problems are with the parents and how they react to and respond to the divorce. And
that's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have found my research. Yep, that's true.
Well, children are going to follow a parent's lead. And if a parent is doing okay, that child is going to do okay also.
It makes such a big difference. Let me say, with all of my studies that I've done, and I've conducted 3 research studies, divorce is a loss, certainly, but children can be resilient, and they can overcome it, and they can lead wonderful lives, as long as they're not dealing with a lot of other stresses, such as being an instant adult and given too much responsibility, or, in the middle between 2 warring, angry parents who badmouth each other. Those scenarios I found out with my research, if kids have to grow up too fast and they don't have a chance to be a child or a teenager, or they're being made to feel that they're, stuck in the middle between parents that hate each other, those, acrimonious negative situations can do some emotional damage. But let me just say, all the large studies on the long-term effects of divorce say that most children of divorce do make out fine overall. They can go on and have happy, successful relationships as long as we do things to build their resiliency. And as parents, as you said, we have to have, good relationships ourselves. We have to model those, supportive, loving, compassionate, interactions with our former partner or, new people that we're dating. And extended family relationships are also very important to keep those going and, to let kids continue to see, hopefully, if possible, grandparents, aunts, and uncles on both sides of the family, because that can really, help them to gain support and to feel that they haven't lost their entire family.
And it all makes perfect sense, and it all would appear from the outside looking in to be something that's easy to do if you love your child. But when you're in the throes of a divorce, it can become quite difficult, especially if you allow your emotions to control how you respond. But
right.
It's all very interesting.
Definitely, you can't let your guilt or your remorse or your negative feelings about your ex interfere. It's so hard sometimes to refrain from saying negative things about your ex, such as, he or she never pays their child support on time. Or if they cared about you, they would show up on time for the visit.
Or even something as covert as rolling your eyes
exactly.
when the other parent is mentioned.
Right.
Yeah.
Because children of divorce do fine as long as they have 2, hopefully, they can do fine with one loving, caring parent. But they do well if they can have a decent relationship with 2 parents, or at least feel that their parents are not, engaged in a war. So, if you're not going to have contact with both of your parents, and many of the individuals I've interviewed either have chosen to have contact with just one of their parents, or maybe there's an absent or missing parent. You know, you want to preserve that sense of the other parent simply because of the fact that it's your child's parent. Even if you don't care for the person any longer, you don't respect them, you know, one of the worst things you can do is try to, encourage the child not to visit the other parent or have any contact with them. You know, I've been through that myself with my two older kids, and there were times that it was tough when we were co-parenting, and I just felt like giving up. But I kept reminding myself, I have to do what's in the best interest of my children. There is something called...
And that's key.
Yes, that's key. There's something called parallel parenting. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yes.
And that can be a good option for couples who feel that they can't navigate successful co-parenting because it's just too stressful. They're not getting along with each other well enough. So they can do the parallel parenting where they have a parenting arrangement, you know, that's more business-like. They might even need a mediator. All their communication is done through email, no phone conversations, no face-to-face contact. But as long as they don't badmouth the other parent and keep to their parenting plan, it's really important for all parents to have a good parenting plan that's pretty routine and scheduled, but also has some flexibility. As kids get older, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. You know, co-parenting's great, parallel parenting is fine, but with a younger child, you want to have a good schedule and a routine that they can count on, that they know is going to be pretty solid, that's not going to change too much. And with a teenager, I think it's really important to have some flexibility and to understand that they're going to need to spend more time with their friends. They may be involved in after-school activities, jobs, and to not make them feel like they have to choose between the rest of their life and spending time with you. Because
yes, and I hear from divorced parents who have teenagers, and, you know, they're worried and they're concerned. Their feelings are hurt. He didn't want to come this weekend. He has plans for the following weekend. And what they don't understand is whether they're divorced or not, when a child hits those teenage years, they're not interested in mom and dad.
Exactly. It's not developmentally appropriate for teenagers to want to be with their parents 24/7. But I think because we want to, in some ways, I remember feeling like I wanted to show what a great parent I was, and I was a successful single parent. You know, it's like a feather in your cap sometimes to feel like your children want to spend time with you. And I did experience when my kids got to be teenagers that feeling of loss when it was their time to be with me and they did choose to be maybe with their dad to do something special or with their friends. But I tried to get over it and worked really hard, and I recommend parents to really examine their own selves and work on reinventing their own life, develop new hobbies, interests, maybe have a night or two a week. You can sign up for a class, go back to college, invest in a new career, or get that degree that you always wanted to get. That's what I did. I went back to school and got my graduate degree in social work, which I'd always wanted to get. And that was good for my kids, too, because they saw me doing something positive. But whatever it is that you choose to do, as long as it's positive and it enhances your own self-esteem, because let's face it, most divorced people have a, slightly declined self-esteem. Their self-worth and their feelings of themselves go down a bit after divorce, and you'll bounce back up. You will, but it can be a tough time, at least for the first few years.
Oh, yeah, it can be. Well, let me ask you this. When you have parents come to you and they're having issues and problems, what are some strategies you recommend they use?
Well, one thing I would recommend is that you get a lot of support, like we discussed. And some of that is legal support. I definitely think that parents can benefit when they're going through a divorce of either having good legal support, mediation, people you can call on, and counseling for yourself, because divorce is such a big upheaval. If there are online resources such as divorcemoms.com and Divorce Magazine, I recommend that you take advantage of those because those have amazing blogs and features that can really benefit you. And, reading about other people's experience and talking with a counselor and maybe even a group, either online or in person, can be highly beneficial. So you feel like you're not alone, and you realize from listening to other people's stories and reading blogs by other individuals that while your own take on your divorce may be unique, you do share some similarities with most other divorced people. And you can gain a lot of tips and coping skills such as, it's okay to date. I wouldn't recommend you introduce your, love interest to your kids right away, but you could start dating, in the first year or two after your divorce, and that might be fun. That may help you bounce back a little bit. It's good to keep a journal and to write your feelings down if you like to do that, or have a couple of special friends that you either blog with or communicate with. But getting those feelings out in a healthy way is very beneficial. I think exercise and staying active and eating a healthy diet can really boost your endorphins in your brain and make you feel better about yourself. I know, some people really take pride in losing that 10 pounds. I know I did, that I've been wanting to lose for a while I was married because I was so stressed out during my marriage. I just really was carrying around a little extra weight. So, joining a gym or starting to walk on a regular basis with friends, those things can really help. A lot of the online resources are very beneficial, Cathy.
Very beneficial. There's, I went through divorce 16 years ago. There was nothing. There are millions of resources online now for parents to consult, and it's amazing.
And don't hesitate to get involved in online groups, and the blogs that they have now are fantastic. And like you, when I was getting my divorce years ago, we didn't have that. But also face-to-face counseling can be really nice. You don't necessarily have to go forever, but if you can, then you might have that time to deal with some of your perhaps anger, resentment, maybe some of the stress that you're dealing with. That can also really help people to regain a sense of self-worth and to feel like, okay, well, I'm going through this difficult time, but I can develop some good coping skills and goals for myself. I'm a big believer in intentions. Setting an intention, which is kind of like a goal, but it's very specific and broken down, and it can really help you stay focused. Like my intention today is, like we talked about earlier, get through my list. So after my list, I can take a few hours off and unwind and relax. But I'm going to do my best to get through my list today and, write it down. Or I'm going to contact that friend that I've been wanting to talk to for a few months because I know that would really help me to feel better and also be good for her. Those kinds of intentions, can really help you stay positive and get out of the victim role. And that's another strategy I really highly recommend, not only for divorced adults, but for adult children of divorce. It's really easy to fall prey to the victim mentality of woe is me, life is hard, and I'm never going to feel better. And, it's really not helpful to blame other people. And, that can happen a lot during a divorce. And if you were raised in a divorced family like I was kind of raised with that way of thinking. It's always somebody else's fault. And once I freed myself up from that and learned to forgive other people and say, okay, my parents didn't have a good marriage and they had a pretty rough divorce and it did impact me, but they probably did the best they could. So I'm going to let go of that.
Well,
and
I'm
not going to let it define who I am.
And, there's no reward in playing the victim.
None.
You get in this mindset that you can't get out of. You don't move from I'm a victim to I'm empowered.
Exactly.
It just doesn't work that way. You stay stuck.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so many of us do. And yet there are opportunities to move beyond that. And certainly with your ex, I know, I spent a lot of time blaming my ex-husband. I didn't even realize it till quite a bit of time later that I wasn't spending the time to look at my part,
Well,
and so busy thinking about what he did wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. He did this, he did that. Well, it takes two to make a marriage, and it takes two to break a marriage.
Exactly. That's so true.
And when we're willing to do a little internal investigation and own our part in it, it's a lot easier to accept where we are and move on with, rebuild a better life for ourselves.
That's so true. I really strongly believe in the value of self-awareness. And coming from a therapeutic perspective, that can help, any individuals going through a divorce, or especially those of us that were raised in a divorced family, to see how our own baggage impacts our relationships and try to look for patterns. And you know what? I realized it's okay to be alone, too. I mean, dating can be fun and all that, but I learned I'd rather be alone than be in a relationship that wasn't healthy for me. And I didn't know that when I was young.
Well, I didn't know it when I was young either, but I've learned that there's a lot of virtue in being alone. I have made the choice to never marry again because I like my independence. I like my time with myself. There was a time when I didn't want to be alone with myself, and I have learned that I'm pretty good company.
Yeah, I bet you are. You're a lot of fun. It's so true. Society puts a lot of stigma on men and women, but particularly women, that if you don't have a partner, if you don't have someone on your arm, there's something wrong with you, You're an old maid.
And there's not.
In your old little studio apartment by yourself, and nobody's going to want you if, you don't get married by the time you're 35 or whatever. I talk to a lot of women who are single, divorced, or, even going through a second divorce, and they're so afraid of being, thought of as being less than wonderful because they don't have a mate. And that desperation is something I've felt, and I know what that's like, and it's really a setup for an unsuccessful relationship.
And that's what I was going to say. I've raised two boys who are young men now, and my oldest had conveyed to me that he respected the choice that I had made. He said, Mom, you could have chosen to find a new relationship, possibly get into another bad situation. He said you had two choices, one that you weren't all that sure about would turn out well, and one that you knew was going to work out. And he said, I'm glad you took the route that worked out for you. And I think that's what's important.
Yes, I mean, we're all unique, and, sometimes if you take some time to examine yourself and the kind of relationships that you want, and you have the opportunity to rebuild trust, because most individuals, either being raised in divorced families or experiencing divorce, have some trust issues, but they can be dealt with. They can be overcome, and maybe given some time, you could have a healthy relationship. But some people make that choice not to be in a committed long-term relationship, and that's perfectly fine. We just need to give ourselves permission to make those choices, and if we do choose a partner, to feel like we deserve to have a relationship that boosts our self-esteem and makes us feel like a better person. And if we're constantly struggling and going through turmoil and just, recycling the same kind of negative relationships, that's definitely not good for our kids either. Getting back to kids, I counsel so many children whose parents have been married and divorced several times, or they're cohabitating in and out of relationships, and they're pretty conflicted about all that, and I'm not saying remarriage is bad for kids. It
our
could
mom
be
and dad are constantly bringing different boyfriends and girlfriends and introducing the kids, and
exactly.
Their parents have to use common sense.
For sure.
You don't want to be alone, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But make it a two-way relationship, not a 3, 4, and 5-way relationship. You can have a relationship without involving your children.
Don't involve your children until you're pretty sure that that new partner wants to be involved with your kids, is a good role model for them. You know them really well, and you've decided that the relationship is going to be pretty permanent. And then go about it really slowly. So many, parents, they move in or they have their new partner move in right away. And while cohabitation, living with a partner and not being married, doesn't have to be negative, if it happens too soon, and especially right after a divorce, it can really be hard for the children who get really confused, because all kids pretty much think of their parents want them to get back together, that reconciliation fantasy. So introducing too many new partners right away is very conflicting. On the other hand, if you date someone for a while, as you said, and you feel like they'd be a great addition to your family, and they're up for all the challenges that, a remarried or blended family gives, great. But, you can't make that judgment quickly, because you're not going to be sure immediately.
No, you're not. And anyone who has been through a divorce, if you were married 13 years or 23 years, you're going to look back and go, why didn't I see that about him or her? You have to give yourself some time to know someone as well as it is possible to know them before you bring your children into it. Well, let's talk about gender. In your work and in the research that you've done, have you found there are any differences in the way boys and girls cope with their parents' divorce?
Yes, I have, Cathy. In fact, I wrote the book Daughters of Divorce because I was really struck by those differences. Because I'm a college teacher and I like research, I designed some research studies in the mid-'90s to try to, figure out what those differences might be. And when I examined over 300 people from intact and divorced homes, both men and women, I found Daughters of Divorce had a slightly different take on their parents' divorce than the young men did that I was looking. The mean age was early 20s, the average age, and a lot of it had to do with their feelings of mistrust about love lasting. They had a lot of pessimism about commitment and marriage, and also slightly lower self-esteem than the young men from intact or divorced families, or young women from intact families. So I went on and I kept doing more interviews. I did a study specifically on daughters of divorce and compared them to women not raised in divorced families and found exactly the same thing. And then I interviewed over 300 women. I interviewed 327 women. Most of them were young women in their early 20s, but just as a comparison, I had some older women. And it's not that it's a drastic difference, but I did find through all my clinical work as well that because a lot of girls tend to spend more time with their moms and identify with their moms more, and the fact that dads tend to not have as much contact with their daughters as their sons after divorce. And in addition to that, as women, we're socialized more to be caretakers, so we're more focused on relationships. And then there's brain differences that I was really surprised about between boys and girls, men and women. And we tend to hold on to our emotions longer when it comes to the amygdala, that emotional hot seat in our brain where we have, the ability to, feel passion or love, negative or positive feelings. So all those things combined, there are slight differences. So that's why I decided to write my book. And, many of the women in my book have had successful relationships. They've gone on to be very, successful in their career and, committed relationships, sometimes marriage. So there is a lot of hope, but just being aware of the tendencies that girls tend to hold in their feelings about their parents' divorce and act like everything's okay. And then later they may come out with some negativity, and that tends to come out in later adolescence and young adulthood. And Judith Wallerstein, the famous researcher who wrote many books on divorce, referred to that as the sleeper effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think parents should be aware of it. Not all girls have it to the same degree. I certainly experienced it myself. So that's one of the reasons I was really compelled to write the book. You know, I wanted to be loved. I was a people pleaser when I was young, so I kind of put a lot of focus on friends and school and didn't really deal much with my negative feelings about my parents' divorce till I was in college, and then it all started coming out. So, you know, just being aware of that. Boys have a tendency to react more immediately and express their feelings more openly about their parents' divorce. And that is actually a healthier coping mechanism as long as they don't go too overboard. And girls tend to hold their feelings in, you know, for a lot of the reasons that I said. So that's certainly not true for all children of divorce. You know,
Yeah.
you will see differences, but those are the tendencies that you see when you interview a lot of young adults and you have them answer questions about their childhood. And then also a lot of the other researchers that I read studies about have come up with some similar trends.
Yeah, we can't paint all children with the same brush, and that's why it's important as a parent that you are keenly aware of your child, how your child processes their emotions, and how you need to deal with your child and what they're going through.
And keep your eyes wide open and notice if there are changes in them. You know, if they start developing, negative feelings about school, their grades drop, for instance, or you notice changes in their appearance. They don't care as much for how they dress, maybe some radical changes in their,
they isolate themselves,
They want to be alone too much. They don't enjoy doing the same hobbies or interests. They don't, really care to spend time with their friends or the other parent. Maybe they did enjoy time with your ex, and now all of a sudden they don't want to spend time with them. You need to find out about that. So a lot of it isn't always easy to sift through. And one way I really recommend that you try to, get to the bottom of some of this is to be available as much as possible, because kids are uncanny for bringing up their issues when you least expect it. So try to have a couple of days a week where you really hang out. At my house, I've always had pizza night. Pizza
night is a good idea.
Yeah.
Or McDonald's night, whatever. But it's important to be available, to listen, and to validate.
Validate for sure, and not pass judgment, not take it to heart if your child expresses negative feelings about you or the divorce. That's all really normal. I didn't have permission to do that because I always felt like I had to hold the family together, and my mom has had some difficulty coping with divorce, and I think that's why I always was very interested in studying parenting and helping parents. But she really struggled. She had 4 daughters. We were all really close in age. And, she was overwhelmed with the demands. And, I think it's important to understand that, you can get help. You can learn different ways of coping. And kids, they do need to be listened to. I'm glad you mentioned that about validation, just to have you there. You don't have to come up with a solution to all their problems.
No, you don't. Just let them know that they're free to talk to you. They can say whatever they need to say, and that they are heard. I found that was what worked with my boys. I didn't have to respond, if it was nothing but give them a hug and tell them I understood.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
don't shut your children down.
Yeah, don't shut them down. And with girls, be aware that there is a natural tendency, as I said, for girls to want to please their moms sometimes. And, be aware of that little adult pattern, which so many women have talked to me about. And you don't really want them to have to grow up too fast. So, be cautious about giving them too much responsibility for babysitting their younger siblings or taking care of things. Certainly you want them to be independent and to have some self-reliance. But I ended up having a chapter just about self-reliance because so many of the daughters of divorce I interviewed were ultra self-reliant. They didn't know how to let someone do things for them and kind of relax a little bit and give and take because they had so much responsibility growing up. So, just be aware of that.
Well, they lose the ability to feel safe being vulnerable.
Yes, vulnerability. Thank you. Another great topic. Kids need to feel that whatever it is that they're going through, whatever thoughts they're having, whatever feelings are okay, and they should be able to express them without fear of rejection or, ridicule, judgment, whether they're feelings about you or their other parent. And, be really careful not to badmouth their other parent. That's so hard. I know. I've been there. I know how difficult it is. But just
it is hard.
It is. One of the hardest things for a divorced parent.
Let me ask you this. Do you have any tips for parents on co-parenting, and especially for parents who are going through a situation where there's a lot of conflict and it's adversarial? They don't get along, but they find themselves having to co-parent together.
Well, if they've decided to co-parent, what I would definitely suggest, as I said earlier, is a parenting plan. And I really strongly recommend that it be written up. There are websites. I don't know if you have one of those. You probably do on, blogs or a section about developing those plans on divorcedmoms.com. But
we do.
Yeah, have a plan in place. And that way you have something you can go back to. I know there are many times that I needed to do that. And try to stick with your plan as much as possible. And treat the other parent, treat your ex in a very businesslike, respectful manner. Try to be, as I said, on time for visits yourself and encourage, that kind of very comfortable exchange. Sometimes parents are better off exchanging younger children, at a public place because going to the other person's home can be very emotional at times. And definitely give that child as much structure as you can when they're younger. You can't parrot the other parent's home, but you can have a communication notebook that you pass back and forth. And, try to communicate about those things, those school activities, homework, those things that are important. And I recommend, if possible, you have belongings, if you can, in each home so that there's not too much exchanging of clothing and belongings between the two houses, because that can be really stressful for kids if they always have most of their clothes at one house and they have to go back and forth between the two houses a lot. For younger children, I recommend that they don't spend one night in one home and the next night in the other home. That may work out conveniently for parents, but most children see that frequent changing between homes very stressful, particularly if they're under the age of, 10 or 11. They want the comfort of being in the same home for at least a few nights in a row. So what may be ideal for you as a parent scheduling-wise may not work for your children.
And we have to focus on what works for the children. Exactly.
And then for the teenager, maybe they're going through a time where they want to spend a lot of time with their friends. We talked about that. Try to, assuming they have friends that you are, in favor of, don't, say negative things about that or prevent that from happening. Encourage them. School-age kids and teenagers both, school-age kids need to have friends over at the house, invite their friends to come over so that their life isn't that drastically different. Sure, it's going to be different after divorce, that they shouldn't have to feel like they're not comfortable having companionship. And if you can avoid moving too far from your child's other parent, that is very beneficial to children.
Yeah, proximity is important, and also keeping them in the same school district. Keep it, there's healing in familiarity. If they're familiar with their surroundings, they have the same friends, they're going to be able to distract themselves and work through any upheaval they're feeling and build a new normal.
Yes, and if you can have good boundaries with the other parent, and even if you do feel frustrated with some of their behaviors at times, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And take a break, and don't, go, after them for, being late on this or that or whatever is annoying to you, because, as I said previously, that is your child's other parent. And I can still remember some negative things my mom said about my dad, and it did impact.
Yeah, and that's not good. When my children were smaller, and my divorce was very conflicted, and there was no co-parenting relationship. My ex, after a few years, just dropped out of the picture. But during the time that we were attempting to co-parent, if I received an email from him that upset me, I would stop and think, okay, respond to him, but respond to him in a way that you would not feel any shame if your children read it.
That's so good. That's a great point. And that goes for everything. Think about how your children are going to remember you when they get to be an adult.
Yeah, are they going to remember you as the irrational parent or the rational parent?
Definitely. Are they going to remember you as someone that put their needs, in the forefront or not?
Yeah. Let me ask you this question, and it's something I hear. It's a question I hear often from divorcedmoms.com readers, and it's not something I ever dealt with or ever even thought about, and it has surprised me a lot that this is a big issue. But I hear from parents wanting to know if they should allow their child to choose which parent they live with.
That's a great question. I wrote a blog about that, and I put it on my website, Moving Past Divorce. And I think I wrote a blog for DivorcedMoms.com about that, too, because that is a very tricky one. And my overall recommendation is to try not to let the child make that decision, because children, especially children under 12, in my opinion, don't know what's in their best interest. And yes, I think that you need to listen to them and validate their feelings and understand why they want a change in their parenting plan and their, where they're spending their time. But often those situations are made during times of stress or turmoil, or you had an argument with them or something of that nature. And they're not the most rational decisions. So as a parent, you need to be the one to show guidance to your children.
You do, and you also need to realize, and I think back to my situation again, my older son had a deeper bond with me. Our younger son had a deeper bond with his father. In fact, I was there to provide sustenance and lay his clothes out for him in the morning. His dad was his world.
Sure.
And if the opportunity had ever come up, in fact, I broached the subject with my husband because our younger child was so devastated by the divorce emotionally.
Sure.
And I said, I will allow him to live with you because I knew that was what my child needed emotionally.
You knew him better. He knew himself.
I knew him better, and I knew what he needed to heal. He missed his father.
Sure.
I can't even imagine, and he was 7 years old. But it wasn't something my ex was open to. But I think it's very important that we take, different aspects into consideration when we're dealing with that issue. As parents, we know where our children belong.
Yes.
If dad or mom is an alcoholic, addicted to drugs, well, no, you don't allow your child to choose. But if you have a child who is more tightly bonded to one parent than they are the other, it only makes sense to me that that child be allowed to go where the bond is.
Definitely, and try to be flexible, as I said, especially as your kids get into adolescence. If they want to spend one more night with the other parent, they want to change their plan, don't take it personally. But
no, don't take it personally.
But be cautious not to, give in to their irrational feelings of, I'm done with this, especially when there are step parents involved. Some girls I've noticed, and that happened in my own family of origin, they don't necessarily like the stepmother. And, maybe they want to not see their dad or perhaps spend all their time at their mom's house. And I think it's a good idea to encourage your daughter or your son, in both cases, but particularly if the daughter has the issue with the stepmother, to continue to visit the other home on a regular basis, even if she doesn't spend the night, and not give in to the feelings of resentment, because most of those feelings do crop up, but they lessen over time, assuming it's not an abusive situation. We're talking about abusive. And the girls that stop spending time with their dads and their stepmoms really do lose out because they don't end up seeing much of their dads. And I don't find that the boys have as much difficulty with the stepdad as the girls have. But, sometimes, it can go either way. Boys can have trouble as well. But just sort of look at that step-parent relationship, too, and, maybe talk to your ex and see if there are ways that, their spouse can try to be more of a friend to the child, because a lot of step-parents, they don't really have training. They want to do the right thing, but they may go about it the wrong way and come across too
Well, they're just like everyone else. They're feeling their way through it blindly and hoping they don't make any mistakes.
They need support, So if parents can support each other and the new partners, in the relationship, it's for the best of the children. Sometimes, it's easy to feel a little bit of rivalry or jealousy towards your new wife, or if you're a man towards your ex-wife's new husband, and those feelings are not productive. The marriage is over. Move on, and try to always keep in mind these partners or step parents can have a positive impact on your child if you kind of distance yourself a little bit and don't get overly involved. And try to stay positive. It's not a bad idea for them to see you, for instance, going out, for special occasions together. Certainly graduations or events that come up, you should be, trying to host some of these events together and show your children that you're a mature adult and capable of having cordial relationships with your former spouse and other significant people in their lives. So all those things are easier said than done, but really
a lot easier said than done.
But then you have a wonderful website, which I'm so pleased to be able to write for, that has great information about all the topics that we're speaking about today.
Yeah, for any moms out there, it is a great resource. I agree with that, and we love featuring your content. Let's talk about Daughters of Divorce, your new book. Tell us a little bit about the book, who it's geared for, how viewers can benefit from it, and most importantly, where it can be ordered from.
Yes, it can be, first of all, I'll start with that. It can be ordered from my website, movingpastdivorce.com, and you go right onto the home page, Cathy, there's a link. There's a picture of the book, and there's a link, and it takes you, you navigate to a page that has Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all kinds of independent bookstores, so you can order it online. Most of the bigger bookstores do carry my book now, like Barnes & Noble. I've been doing a lot of book signings, and, the word's starting to catch on that this is a great book. So, but you can certainly order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or through my website. And my book is really about teaching women who were raised in divorced families to have a more optimistic view of love, and whether or not they decide to get married or not, just working through some of the issues that I found were really key in my studies. And one of those was, self-awareness and going back a little bit to the past and looking at what unresolved issues might be there and trying to work through those. I talk a lot about forgiveness. And then looking at your self-esteem and ways to really work on that and improve that. I have a chapter about trust because it's so key, as I said earlier. And I have a very important chapter about the father-daughter relationship because that can really impact how you feel about your relationship with a romantic partner throughout your life if there's a wound that hasn't been healed. And then after that, I have a chapter really about vulnerability. We already talked about that and how to resolve conflicts, with a partner in a healthy way. And lastly, I have the 9th chapter is about making a commitment and not being fearful if you decide to do that. And a lot of tips along the way. Each chapter has stories of the women that I interviewed and also action steps at the end of each chapter, which walks you through different strategies on how to work through the issues. So it's not just telling you what the problems are, is reading about other individuals who have experienced them and have successfully worked through them. There's a lead story in every chapter about a woman who has resolved the issues or, the pathway, and then very concrete action steps that can bring you through the book. And most of the feedback I'm getting from women, because I do some coaching, is, wow, I never realized that other women went through these things. I thought I was the only one that had a fear of commitment or was afraid that my relationships were all going to end badly, or self-esteem issues, trust, all the things we've talked about. And it's just a relief to read the book and to realize I don't have to feel like I'm doomed to have.
Yeah, and it also sounds like the book would be beneficial to men who are married to a daughter of divorce or a man who is in a relationship with a daughter of divorce.
Definitely.
So this isn't, definitely.
I'm married, as you know, and my husband, he likes reading some of the chapters because, honestly, some of the ghosts from the past that I talk about still crop up now and again.
Yeah.
And I have to say I'm kind of pre-wired to have trust issues, and it doesn't take much time, for me to want to scan his cell phone, or if he's coming home late and I'm questioning him, and then I have to go. I really go back to those strategies in the book all the time myself and remind myself, if you have a partner who's trustworthy and they're there for you most of the time, step back. Ask yourself, how much of my trust issues are in the moment and how much are based on my past relationships? All those tips that I offer in the book really come in handy for myself sometimes.
It sounds like a great book. I will be ordering it, although I'm not a daughter of divorce. I do have, I can work on some self-esteem issues and some vulnerability issues, so I'm fairly certain I will find it useful.
Well, great. Weekly thought that the book would really help a lot of people, not just daughters of divorce. We got a great review from Publishers Weekly, and they said that you don't have to be a daughter of divorce to benefit from the book. And that was really quite, a bonus to read that, because I said, you know what? I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that has these issues.
Yeah. Well, Terry, it has been great talking to you. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with our listeners and taking the time. Maybe we can do it again one day.
It's been my pleasure, Cathy. Thank you so much.
My guest today has been Terry Gaspard, licensed therapist, college instructor, and author of Daughters of Divorce. For more information about Terry, her book, and her work with divorce and women's issues, visit www.movingpastdivorce.com.